What's going on, everybody? C4 here. Welcome to 2.0, the second stage of our NFL draft content here on the channel, where we're going to be going through my top 10 list, my player rankings list for the upcoming 2019 NFL draft. And today, what better position to start with than the quarterbacks? So these, I feel pretty comfortable about these lists. They can still fluctuate a little bit with the Senior Bowl and the Scouting Combine. And, while we're going to be going through all the positions and getting top 10 breakdowns over the next couple weeks, I think after the Combine, it's not going to be, position by positional breakdown. After the Combine stuff, when things fluctuate just a little bit, I probably will just release one big updated, like one offensive video, one defensive video, break down my changes. So until then, right now, I feel really, really comfortable with this list because now we have their full body of work to kind of look at and dissect. It's going to be much more in depth than the last quarterback rankings that I did. And what I'm going to do here for these rankings and for every other ranking positionally, I'm going to do for the top 5, we're doing 10 prospects, the top 5 are all going to get pro comparisons. I think pro comparisons to most people will be able to resonate more so than when I'm talking about a guy's ball placement or his pocket presence, stuff like that. That's not going to, be relatable. That's not going to tick for some people. When I say Drew Lock reminds me of this quarterback, that's like a lot easier comparison for you guys to feel and judge a certain prospect. So that is where I'm going to try and help you guys out and make it stand out a little bit more. But before we jump into our rankings today, let's get it's not holding up so well. Let's get a quick look at my quarterback rankings 1 that we did a couple months ago. For my honorable mentions for that list, I had Nick Fitzgerald from Mississippi State, I had Brian Lewicki from Michigan State, and Taryn Christian from South Dakota, small school prospect. And my top 10 went as followed. At 10, we had Shea Patterson from Michigan. At 9, Clayton Thorson from Northwestern. At 8, Daniel Jones from Duke. At 7, Easton Stick from North Dakota State. At 6, Jarrett Stidham from Auburn. Number 5 was Will Grier from West Virginia. Number 4 was Tyree Jackson from Buffalo. Number 3 was Ryan Finley from NC State. Number 2 was Drew Lock from Mizzou. And number 1 was Justin Herbert from Oregon. Now, a bunch of those guys aren't declaring. Justin Herbert's not. Shea Patterson is not. And there's been a lot of tape and a lot of evaluation that has drastically affected the stocks of some of these players. So knowing that's our base starting point, let's get into our quarterback rankings too. So before we get in the top 10, I have some honorable mentions here. And I'm going to be honest with you, one of these honorable mentions for sure. Literally, there's no real gap between him and I would say number 8 on this list. The only reason why is probably NFL size. So the biggest honorable mention that I think is, if he has a really good Senior Bowl, like depending on how the offseason goes for him, he could very well get himself into my top 10. And that is Brett Rypien from Boise State. Rypien was very productive at Boise State last year, 3,700 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 7 picks. But his size is a little bit worrying. He's 6'2", and fringe 200-pound quarterback. That's always kind of going to be held against him a little bit, and that's the only reason why. He doesn't have that prototypical NFL size. If he did, from arm talent standpoint, from an IQ standpoint, probably would crack our top 10. We got Jordan Tiamu from Ole Miss. Again, kind of tape looks good, but it's just that NFL size is going to, I think, kind of go against him. But if he can have a good showing this offseason, he could very well push himself in. We have Clayton Thorson from Northwestern. It's kind of the inverse. Has the NFL size going for him, but his tape was inconsistent, and his stats don't jump off the board. And then lastly, for the honorable mentions, we have Taylor Cornelius from Oklahoma State taking over for Mason Rudolph. Got your height, weight, speed, got your arm, but again, he's coming from a very, very quarterback-friendly scheme. He's only a 1-year starter, so we're going to have to wait and see, but I think he will catch on as like a 6th, 7th round ultimate project type player. So that being said, let's work our way into our top 10. Starting at number 10, we have Jarrett Stidham, 6'3", 215 pounds from Auburn. Originally was my number 6 quarterback. Now he slipped a little bit down to number 10. Did not look particularly great this year. 61% completion percentage, 2,800 total yards, 21 total touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Now, all the touchdowns, as I go through it, are going to be including the rushing touchdowns. So when you look at Jarrett Stidham, I firmly do believe that when you look at his tape, he has better accuracy than just the 61% kind of leads you to believe. He has really good mechanics, a good base. I do think he has a little bit of gamer in him. I think, you watch him play in his big moments, he will make some wow plays. That's a little bit of an intangible thing that he is working for him. When you look at him, I think he does have a limited ceiling. I don't know how much more room he has to grow as a quarterback prospect. I think he's probably pretty close to his ceiling. And seeing what we did at Auburn, sure, it was a down year. Sure, he, out of all these quarterbacks in this year's draft class, probably with Drew Lock, we'll talk about, hurt their draft stock just from, the down year, which is definitely what they shouldn't have had because this is a weak draft class. And guys that had that talent coming in, you would hope at worst just play as good as you did the year before, and your draft stock's going to remain the same. But Stidham, and I do think Drew Lock to an extent, kind of hurt themselves with their play this year. Another thing with Jarrett Stidham is he has robotic reads. We'll talk about that for a couple of players. These are basically guys that, I don't want to say Jared Goff is, but it's a way that I kind of describe Jared Goff, because I firmly believe Jared Goff, good quarterback, all that stuff going for him. But when McVay says, here we go, we're going to run A, B, and you throw to A. And then you just lock in. The robotic read is, I'm going to A. Coach says go to A, I'm going to A. When in reality, kind of a thing that differentiates a good quarterback from a great quarterback is the quarterback that doesn't always get locked into A, and he can look for B. He can look for C. Hey, he could just go to D, the wild card, and make a wild play. I think a guy like Jarrett Stidham with those robotic reads, he looks into his first guy, and it only takes a good defense, a good DC to pick up on that, and it's just going to be turnover after turnover. So, open up at 10. I feel like he probably will go as high as the third round. Personally, for me, I have probably a 4 to 6, probably 4 to 5. We'll call it in the middle. I kind of have like a 5th, 4th round grade on Jarrett Stidham right now. Going to quarterback number 9, we have Gardner Minshew, 6'2", 220 pounds, out of Washington State. In 2018, had a 70% completion percentage, 4,800 total yards, 42 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Now, this guy kind of came out of nowhere, and I think maybe the success of Patrick Mahomes and that air raid gimmicky offenses that completely got written off in years past. And ultimately, I do think a little bit it is Patty Mahomes is the outlier. He's the exception to these air raid quarterbacks. But the more and more NFL teams want that college offense, the more and more of these air raid quarterbacks are going to be seen as a lot more feasible than they would have been, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So when you look at Gardner Minshew as a prospect, what was he, 5th or 4th or something like that in the Heisman race? He had a really, really good year, obviously, but pretty much any quarterback in a Mike Leach system is going to have really nice stats. He has a pocket presence to him. Really, really good in the pocket. Great feet. I think he's an underrated athlete. Has a good arm. And we're going to call it Baker vibes. I'm going to use that for another play. I get a lot of Baker Mayfield. That leader that clearly can rally the team around him. Has that, I don't want to say big game mentality, because obviously Washington State kind of slowed up near the end against some tough competition, but he has that fire intangible that I think a lot of people now, especially seeing how that has kind of, for Baker Mayfield, helped him transition into a leader as a rookie and kind of turn that whole Cleveland Browns franchise around. I'm not saying that all these guys that get that Baker vibes can do that, but they have that. That's certainly a thing that, when you look at a guy like a Marcus Mariota, for example, doesn't have Baker vibes. He's kind of like the quiet, lead by example, I guess, type. I think Gardner Minshew has a little bit of that fire to him. The downside for Minshew is he does have inconsistent reads, and he's from the Mike Leach system. So ultimately, I don't know how teams are going to evaluate it. Usually Mike Leach quarterbacks go really, really late because they're just seen as, obviously they throw the ball 50 sometimes. Clearly, those stats are going to be inflated. So I don't know how scouts and how those people are going to hold that against them. But I definitely think from a later mid-round quarterback, I think Minshew can definitely lock on as a backup, and there is some potential there for him to develop over his NFL career. Going to quarterback number 8, we have Ryan Finley, 6'4", 210 pounds, out of NC State. He was my 3rd quarterback in QB rankings 1, slipping all the way down to number 8. That is the biggest drop out of any player. Ryan Finley in 2018 had a 67% completion percentage, 4,000 total yards, 26 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. He just didn't do it for me. And the more, I watched a couple games when I did my rankings early on, I was like, yeah, he got some nice wide receivers there, a really good offensive line, but he's making some good plays. He's accurate, has that size. I thought he'd be a perfect fit for the New England Patriots, for example. But the more and more I was able to break down his tape, the more and more I saw, average arm strength. Arm strength isn't incredible. Obviously, he was a limited athlete. He's not a guy that's going to be able to extend plays with his feet. But the biggest thing is that he is one of the most experienced quarterbacks in college football. That's something that I put in his positive category. He has a lot of experience, 46 career games. But when you look at his mechanics and the things that should be refined by the time you've played 46 career games, his mechanics seem like they're still quite a bit of ways off from where you want to see, a promising NFL quarterback, a guy that I originally had at 3. His mechanics are not top 3 in this class, and it's just kind of weird. That leads me to think maybe he's pretty close to his ceiling. If after 46 games, some of the simple things that guys like Dwayne Haskins, guys like, you could probably even look at Daniel Jones, doesn't have a whole lot of playing time behind them, but the mechanics are already further ahead. So another positive, though, for Ryan Finley to go along with his experience is, very, very accurate, within the chains, 10 yards. 10 yards, very, very accurate. And, sometimes that's something that people just aren't really good at. They throw worm burners, as we call them, and they don't take that part seriously. So I think, from a backup standpoint, Ryan Finley can come in. Definitely has that upside, but, you really got to go to a place with a good quarterback coach, I think, to maximize his potential. Going to quarterback number 7, we have Easton Stick, 6'2", 220 pounds, out of North Dakota State. In 2018, he had 62% completion percentage, 3,400 total yards, 45 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. So when you look at Easton Stick, clearly he's a great athlete. He's a dual threat quarterback. He has a good arm, just designed for those RPOs, and he can extend plays. Got to draw a lot of comparisons to Carson Wentz. He's nowhere near as refined or as good an athlete as Carson Wentz, but they are fairly similar, obviously coming from a really, really similar offense there at North Dakota State. When you look at the negatives from Easton Stick, I think there's inconsistent decision-making. Nothing more paramount to the final game between them and Eastern Washington. He had a couple wild plays. Like, those are NFL-caliber throws. But I think the reason why he's not in my top 5 is just the same mistakes, the same brain farts. Like, why did that throw happen? The inconsistent decision-making that separates the good to the really good. I think that's kind of holding him back just right now, but obviously you're going to be able to develop and grow as a player and get rid of that. But I just feel like because of the level of competition, even though North Dakota State's really good, you're not going against, Div 1 type guys. That decision making might have been even more paramount if he's going up against consistently DBs and defensive coordinators and just defensive players in general that are going to be going to the NFL versus what you're playing in FCS. But still, I do like Easton Stick as a prospect. I think he probably 4th round, somewhere in that range, has some upside to him. Going to quarterback number 6, we have Tyree Jackson, 6'7", 245 pounds, out of Buffalo in 2018. 55% completion percentage, which is not very good. 3,300 total yards, 35 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. When you look at Tyree Jackson, freaky size at 6'7", 245. You got a lot of upside. I think he's a very, very high ceiling. He has a huge arm, one of the biggest arms in the class. But when you look at the negatives, inconsistent decision-making, his accuracy will be 2 good throws and a worm burner. 3 good throws and an overthrow. 4 good throws and 2 picks back-to-back. Just again, things that if he would have returned to school, I think he could have refined it a little bit. I personally think it would have helped his draft stock if he came out next year. Even though next year's quarterback class is viewed to be stronger, I think Tyree Jackson could still hold his own if he could refine those things, go back to Buffalo for one more year. I think he also still has some raw quarterback mechanics. He's an ultimate project. I think he's the biggest project quarterback in this class. But at 6'7", 245, get on a good QB coach, he could become that next, I don't want to say Cam Newton because that's just bogus, but I'll just say he's a bad QB coach away from becoming just another Brock Osweiler type. Big, tall quarterback, has that size that scouts and teams are going to want to drool over. But if you don't have that guy that can tap in his potential and you kind of just think, he's going to be our backup, might be able to pick up a thing from a QB or two, not going to work. You need to get a guy that's going to get in, be hands-on with Tyree Jackson, and help develop his game because really he should have went back to school for another year. So understanding that, I could see him going 3rd, 4th round. Probably a little bit more comfortable saying 4th round grade for Tyree Jackson right now, but 3rd in that range. So then going to our top 5. At number 5, we're going to be going with Drew Lock, 6'4", 225 pounds, out of Missouri. In 2018, 63% completion percentage, 3,700 total yards, 34 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. And when you look at Drew Lock, I think you see a guy that has great arm strength, prototypical size. He has proven production. Last year, 2 years ago, he had like 40-plus touchdowns in the SEC, which is no easy task whatsoever. But when you look at the negatives of Drew Lock, I see a guy that has, I don't want to say bad football IQ, but questionable football IQ. Just struggles a lot against the blitz. Struggles to read the blitz. You blitz him, he's going to make a lot of bad decisions. That's been paramount throughout his career. Has not really improved upon that. Inconsistent decision-making, again, kind of a common trend for some of these fringe quarterbacks, and a lot of quarterbacks this year is just, for every 2 good throws will be one, like, what are you doing throw. And another thing I like to hold against Drew Lock is he never could win the big game. When you want to try to scout Drew Lock, you want to look against, what does he do against the top teams in the SEC, and he never really looked good. He had some playmakers here and there. They're banged up last year. But even over the last 2 years, when he's been considered one of the better young quarterbacks in college, all of the big games that Missouri has, or at least almost all of them, he has not looked good. He's just not looked good. And that's definitely something that you want to see. You want to see a guy that when the pressure's on, the talent is at the top of the top in college football. You want to see a QB that can hold his own. And I saw with Drew Lock a guy that I don't know, man. So much. It doesn't all fall on the shoulders of the quarterback when you don't play well in good games. But still, I think if you are that guy that wants to be considered, a first-round pick in those big games for Missouri, Drew Lock would shine. Drew Lock would carry his team. He would elevate his team. And I just didn't really see that much during his time at Missouri. So my pro comparison for him is going to be Brady Quinn. That's like going way back in my notes to like the first year that I was kind of starting to take notes on the draft and take notes on college football prospects. Brady Quinn was known to have great size, great arm strength, but lowish football. Like literally all the positives and negatives between Drew Lock are pretty much how I felt about Brady Quinn. And we all saw what happened with Brady Quinn with the Cleveland Browns. Busted out of the league, and now I think he hosts a radio show. So not a roaring review here for Drew Lock. Going to QB number 4, we have Kyler Murray, who we're going to guess he's going to come in around 5'9". That's being generous. I've heard some people say he'll be more closer to 5'8". 190 pounds from Oklahoma. In 2018, your Heisman Trophy winner had 69% completion percentage, 5,300 total yards, 54 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. When you look at Kyler Murray, clearly an elite athlete. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. The way that NFL offenses are going for, you would think now more than ever is the time that a guy like Kyler Murray would look great in the National Football League, and he has great arm strength. Don't let the size fool you. He has a cannon of the arm. He can make all the throws. But when you look at the negatives, clearly the size is an issue, and I'm actually not so worried about the height. If he does come 5'8" and not 5'9", like as close to 5'10" as he can get, I just think it's his frame for how much he runs. If you just try to think of Kyler Murray at Oklahoma not running, he's not a top 5 quarterback. When you throw in the complete athlete that he is, you're like, man, this guy could do something. But the fact that he's 190, durability against NFL caliber players, I just don't see how a guy that's fringe 190 is going to go up. He definitely has to bulk up for sure. That his weight for me, actually, well, that's the easier way to put it. His weight, his frame is a bigger concern than his height is for me. He's also just a one-year starter, and he's coming from a QB-friendly system and conference in general, so his stats are going to look pretty nice. But still, he's definitely the most polarizing player in this draft. I feel like he might know something that we don't for him deciding to go with football over baseball. And I would not be surprised to see him go in the first round, though personally I have a low second round to third round grade on him. Pro comparison is a Russell Wilson light version. Because Russell Wilson, obviously from a height standpoint, from a play style standpoint, they're going to get comparisons. But Russell Wilson's, he's a thick boy. Russell Wilson got some muscle on him. He has some durability. Kyler Murray, on the other hand, light version. He's like the junior. He's like mini-me for Russell Wilson. Going to quarterback number 3, we have Daniel Jones, 6'5", 220 pounds, out of Duke. 2018 stats, he had a 60% completion percentage, 3,000 total yards, 25 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Now, when you look at Daniel Jones, what you see obviously jumped off the board is the prototypical size at 6'5", 220. He's also a very, very good athlete, can scramble, can extend plays with his feet. And for me, his deep ball reminds me 100% of the deep ball that Nick Foles has. The Nick Foles deep ball, which is not perfect, but it worked a whole lot. It won the Eagles the Super Bowl. It literally looks the same. When he takes a shot downfield, all I see is Nick Foles taking a shot downfield. But when you look at the negatives of Daniel Jones, again, kind of like what we talked about with Jared Stidham, he's robotic reads. You say A, B, and C, but A is probably the better route. That's what the coach calls. He's going to look at A. And if A's not there, he gets flustered. And that is something that definitely a good QB coach will be able to work out of him, but I think that is another thing that kind of separates him from becoming maybe the number 2 quarterback where a lot of people clearly have him this year. For me, there are some arm strength concerns, which is weird. Usually QBs that are 6'5", 220, they have cannons. I see a guy that struggles to put some zip on it. The Nick Foles doesn't have the biggest arm. He gets a lot of air under his balls, and I'm seeing that with Daniel Jones. And I kind of think maybe Nick Foles does that by design. And when I look at Daniel Jones' tape, I don't know if he does it by design or he does it by limitations. He just doesn't have that cannon of an arm to zip it across the middle of the field for 12 yards, as well as a deep ball. So while I do think he has a pretty deep ball, I don't know if he has that switch up to cannon it down and not just loft it. So for that, I'm going to give him a pro comparison of Mitchell Trubisky. I think they both are bigger quarterbacks that have some mobility to them, underrated mobility to them. I think they both have similar issues with not necessarily arm strength, but I think when I see Trubisky when he was coming out, I thought his reads were a little robotic. I think Trubisky had a little bit better completion percentage, a little bit more accurate, but just looking at their tape side by side, it was a fairly easy comparison for me to make, athletically and stylistically. Going to QB number 2, we have Will Grier, 6'2", 220 from West Virginia. In 2018, he had a 67% completion percentage, 3,800 total yards, 40 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. When you look at the positives of Will Grier, he has lethal short to medium range accuracy. His ball placement is phenomenal. I think he's an underrated athlete because I remember a couple times when he was with my Gators, he would scramble. He'd be able to make plays, run design plays, even though he's not considered a dual threat. I definitely don't think enough people are giving him credit for his mobility. And again, kind of like Gardner Minshew, I think you get a little Baker vibes from him. I think he has that little bit of fire, that little bit of spark, that little bit of intangible leadership that some of these other quarterbacks lack. The negatives can be considered his age. He's going to be 24 when the draft comes, even though I don't think that's a big issue. Comparison, like Dwayne Haskins is going to be like 21. There's just obviously that gap that a lot of teams will weigh. I think there are some concerns about his arm strength, being able to get some zip on the ball. His pocket presence is not the best. He gets flustered when you bring the blitz. His footwork gets a little bit sloppy, and just his overall consistency. He'll have a bunch of good throws and then a couple down throws. Like, it's just more so drives with him. Where other players have 2 good throws, 1 bad throw, I think Will Grier's like he'll have 2 good drives and then a horrific drive, and then a wow drive and then another horrific drive. So because of that inconsistency, because there is still some potential there, I'm going to give him the pro comparison of Kirk Cousins. I think they both have similar strengths, similar weaknesses. I think when you see with Kirk Cousins right now, good short, medium accuracy, has a little bit of juice to him, an underrated athlete, but consistency and arm strength are the 2 big question marks, and I think that kind of rings true between Will Grier and Kirk Cousins. And then finishing up here with my number 1 quarterback for the 2019 draft class, it's going to be Dwayne Haskins, 6'3", 220 pounds, out of Ohio State in 2018. 70% completion percentage, 4,900 total yards, 54 total touchdowns to 8 interceptions. When you look at the positives of Dwayne Haskins, I think he has very, very good short to medium accuracy and an incredibly high quarterback IQ. Not just in general, and in comparison to some of these system QBs we call Ohio State quarterbacks as of late, J.T. Barrett and Braxton Miller and Cardale Jones. I think when you look at Dwayne Haskins, you see a guy that has a lot of NFL caliber IQs to him. He can make adjustments to the line of scrimmage. He can call his own plays, where I feel like the other guys were more so robots to Ryan Day and what Urban Meyer wanted them to do. So I think Dwayne Haskins, and plus his age, he has his age going for him. He's one of the younger quarterbacks in the class. The negatives, pocket presence, which is a pretty common thing for most, I'd say almost 90% of college quarterbacks. They have to work on that. He's only a 1-year starter at Ohio State, so people that want to see proven production, it's not quite there. And then even though I kind of said he has a better IQ than most Ohio State quarterbacks, you're still going to have that whole, is he still a system quarterback? These Ohio State quarterbacks have not been panning out, and while Dwayne Haskins looked the best of the bunch, he still has that tag going against him when people are looking at reasons why Dwayne Haskins shouldn't be the first QB off the board. So that being said, my pro comparison, I have like kind of a hybrid. Some of his stuff reminds me of Jared Goff, some reminds me of Jameis Winston. I felt ultimately Jameis Winston with better decision making is Dwayne Haskins. Jameis Winston always looked very, very good. But the downside for Jameis Winston going at Florida State, and still a downside for Jameis Winston right now with the Bucs, is just what are you doing with your decision making? He'll have a bunch of perfect balls, and then he'll just throw a pick, and you're like, why are you doing that? Dwayne Haskins protects the football a lot better than Jameis Winston, but more so from an athlete and from a mechanics and a stylistic standpoint, Jameis Winston at Florida State and Dwayne Haskins at Ohio State rings very true for me. So give Dwayne Haskins a better decision-making Jameis Winston pro comparison. So there you go, guys. Those are my top 10 quarterbacks plus some honorable mentions for the upcoming 2019 draft class. Do you agree or disagree with any of my rankings? Did I miss anybody? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, if you're first time stopping by, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button. Smash the like button if you enjoy. We're going to be doing these for all of the positions for this upcoming draft to help you guys out, get you guys some draft boards. So I hope you guys continue to support it and enjoy it. And that does it for me today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.